Why is negotiation relevant? Why are we here? Why are the three of us together? In my work in addressing and solving the violence problem in psychiatric care and services that began many years ago, where the kind of violence that shows up in the healthcare system and in the behavioral health community systems, this is very acute and tantamount to the kinds of events that our public safety systems have to manage throughout the nation. And in a desire to understand how this work was being done at the very best levels it could be, my research led me to three people. The great Greg Smith from Mountaintop, Pennsylvania, who's not here with us today, to Gary Noesner, and to Jack Cambria. This was in an interest to help resolve the extraordinary number of containment procedures that were occurring in a care system in which I was directly involved and responsible to reduce, but also to attend to the training needs of a workforce that desperately needed something more than what they were getting. And it was through hearing the anecdotes, the stories, the events that both of you have engaged in your respective fields. Gary, you with the FBI, Jack, you with the NYPD. I grew up listening to your voice on the news. And I don't think there's a person in the United States who doesn't have some working knowledge of what happened at Waco. And for the both of you who already knew each other very well by the time I got in contact with you, for both of you to be willing, after some years of discussions and development, to come here and talk about these principles that we've learned we all cherish, that we all know work, that we all know are desperately needed and for strange reasons, not the first choice many times, very often, in how we engage people that can present discontrol, dysregulation, anger, and go to extremities in their behavior to get their needs met. Your willingness to come here and provide, in my view, what would be described as legacy-level, meaningful education that people will find accessible, valuable, that anybody, whether in the professional negotiation sense or someone who's just curious about this domain, will find value in. We're very grateful to you. So thank you for your willingness to be here.
It's great to be here.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you.
When you consider, both of you represent over 70 years in professional negotiation experience in very, very high-risk domains. You've traversed a long stretch of geography managing not just the events, but programs, systems, leaders, other parts of the world on this topic. What makes you still to this day so passionate about sharing this knowledge with the world, would you say? Gary, we'll start with you.
Well, I mean, the field of negotiations has had a significant life-saving impact, not just on hostages and victims, as the case may be, but in saving the lives of police officers. Because if we can diffuse tense, dangerous situations, that then sets up a situation where police officers do not have to enter a dangerous situation. We want our people to go home every night. We certainly want to save innocent life, but most importantly, that we don't needlessly throw our lives or devalue our lives doing something reckless and unnecessary. So that's why back in the 70s, when NYPD came up with this concept, our dear friend Frank Boltz and Harvey Schlossberg, now deceased, came up with a method. Instead of charging in like we did in the old days, let's contain the situation, let's open a dialogue, let's contrast the benefits of cooperation versus the risks of resistance. And that was the beginnings of a very effective, purposeful approach to dealing with a whole range of crisis events that initial growth was expanded. We expanded some up with the FBI and other departments. We learned from each other, trial and error. The whole field really grew out of a necessity on law enforcement agencies to handle these situations more effectively, more safely. And it's had a profound impact. I don't know that there are any statistics that really adequately address the thousands and thousands of lives have been saved because of this approach.
It's almost impossible to collect that kind of data.
It doesn't exist.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I think we would agree that while it is life-saving, while it is effective, while it was born out of necessity, isn't it interesting that people must be trained in something like this, that it doesn't come naturally to everybody, and that many people want to defer to charging in and control. What do you think about that, Jack, when you think about the conversion of your agency, because you were around when it started, the conversion of your agency from just going in to engaging in dialogue, trying to engender trust, engender collaboration, and then resolve things peaceably. It took a long time to get these principles to become appreciated by a large workforce.
Sure. So I wasn't around at the onset of the concept of hostage negotiations, which Gary pointed out did start in the NYPD based on a series of 4 different events specifically. Very briefly, it was the Attica prison riots. That was back in 1971. The end result of that was 39 people, mostly prisoners, but also correction officers, were killed. And the correction officers that were killed were the result of police bullets, when they tried to take over the back to prison. So the NYPD looked at that, but considered it's hundreds of miles from the borders of New York City. We know about it, but didn't really impact too much. Fast forward to the August of 1972, and they made a movie out of this incident called Dog Day Afternoon. It was a bank robbery starring Al Pacino, but it was a true-to-life type of zany kind of bank robbery. It lasted some 12 hours. And
It was a great movie.
And a tactical application when they went from point A, the bank, which was in Brooklyn, to point B, which is JFK Airport, when the FBI had a tactical intervention with that, and it was over at that point. 1 month later, and this is what the NYPD seriously looked at, was the Munich Olympic massacre.
Right.
Where 11 Israeli athletes and coaches were killed after 5 different Palestinian terrorists entered into the dormitories housing the Israeli athletes and coaches, and then the result of that was 11 were killed, right? Including a police officer and those 5 terrorists. So it was at that point, we had a chief in the NYPD named Simon Eisdorfer, who was of the Jewish faith, and he was watching these events as they were unfolding very carefully. He approached the police commissioner at the time, a guy by the name of Patrick V. Murphy, and said, "Commissioner, this is something that could very easily happen in New York City. We have a very large Jewish population. We should have detectives trained as hostage negotiators." He liked the idea. He goes, "Put something together, bring it back to me," and so we did. And so the hostage negotiation team was born. So Gary mentioned Dr. Harvey Schlossberg was also Detective Harvey Schlossberg.
And we're all
in the
still
NYPD.
very friendly with...
His wife, Tony.
Tony.
Yes. And they tapped him. He was with the psychological unit of the NYPD. And they tapped him and they said to him, put together some guidelines for hostage taking. So Harvey said at the time, well, that's not what I really do. I see clients one-on-one, and a typical NYPD
He was
response.
a wellness guy. He
Yeah.
was serving the workforce.
That's right.
Right.
And Harvey's, after Harvey said, I don't really do that, typical NYPD response is, well, do it anyway. And so he did some research and he put together these guidelines, which are still practiced today through probably every hostage team across the world. And then they started the process of training captains and above around that time, which is, mid to late 1972. And then in January of 1973 was the final incident that kind of sealed the fate of the hostage team would be born. And that was an incident that happened in Brooklyn, Williamsburg, Brooklyn. It was a sporting goods store. A radical group at the time goes in, they rob guns and money, for their cause, and they were interrupted by the police, and it winds up being a 47-hour hostage siege with one of our police officers from emergency service, a man by the name of Stephen Gilroy, was killed, and also 2 other police officers were shot, and one of the perpetrators was shot as well. And it was finally over after, 47 hours, and thus the hostage team was born.